I backed my fiancé's dream. Then I became his worst nightmare. My name is Sophia, and I used to believe love could fix anything. I believed that if you gave someone your whole heart, they would protect it. I believed sacrifice made love stronger. I believed loyalty was returned. I believed all of that until I met Edward. I met him during my internship at Morris Consulting in Missouri, United States. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when we crashed into each other in the lobby. Papers flew, coffee spilled. We both knelt to clean up the mess, and our hands brushed. He laughed softly and said he owed me another coffee. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks. Long walks turned into nights where we talked about dreams and the future. He was a doctor, kind, smart, driven. He wanted to open his own clinic one day, not just for money, but to help people with dignity. I admired him deeply. I saw something rare in him. Within 3 months, we moved in together. It felt fast, but it felt right. Looking back, I realized something important. Love can move quickly, but trust should not. At the time, I did not know the difference. Edward talked about his dream almost every night. He wanted to build a clinic where patients felt respected. He hated how rushed and cold hospitals could be. He said people deserved care, not just treatment. I listened, and I believed in him. The idea to move to Canada was mine. I thought a larger system would offer him better chances, more room to grow, more opportunity. He hesitated at first. Leaving home scared him, but he trusted me. Eventually, he agreed. We decided he would go first. He would settle in, get licensed, and secure a job. I would follow once things were stable. The night I drove him to the airport, my chest felt tight. I smiled, but tears slipped down anyway. He held my face and whispered, "This is the start of our life." I watched his plane disappear into the sky. I did not know I was watching the start of something else too. Canada welcomed him quickly. He joined a private hospital. He called every night, describing snow-covered streets and busy wards. He sounded happy, and I felt proud. Within a year, Edward qualified for independent practice in Canada. His confidence grew. His voice on the phone sounded stronger. He told me he was ready to open his own clinic. When I visited, the space was empty. Bare walls, cold floors, nothing but echoing silence. But Edward walked through it, like it was already alive. "This will be reception," he said. "There will be 3 consultation rooms here, and later we'll expand." He said we. That word meant everything to me. I wanted to help him build it. I wanted to be part of it. So I transferred £200,000 to him, my savings, part of the inheritance my father left me before he passed. It was meant to secure my future. I believed Edward was my future. The clinic opened 6 months later. It was modern and beautiful. Patients loved it. His schedule filled quickly. He thanked me often. He said he could not have done it without me. I believed him. That was my first mistake. Everything changed the day Edward hired Debbie. She was young, confident, and efficient. Her role was administrative support. She handled patient records, scheduling, and compliance paperwork. At least, that was what he told me. The first time I met her during a video call, something felt wrong. Not because she was beautiful. I was not insecure. But she looked at Edward like she already belonged beside him. Her smile lingered too long. Her tone felt too soft. I pushed the thought away. Love requires trust, I told myself. Months passed. Small things began to bother me. When I joined calls, conversations shifted. Staff hesitated before speaking. Once, a nurse referred to Edward and Debbie as they. Edward laughed it off. "You're imagining things," he said gently when I asked. "You're stressed." He sounded calm, reassuring, and I wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than facing doubt. The truth arrived quietly. Debbie was pregnant. 4 months. I found out through someone at the clinic who thought I already knew. My hands shook as I ended the call. The room felt too small. My chest felt tight. When I confronted Edward, he did not deny it. He cried. He said it was a mistake. He said he tried to end it. He said Debbie's family had influence in medical boards and hospital networks. "They can destroy my clinic if I refuse to marry her," he said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "What about us?" He went silent. Then he said softly, "I can't lose everything I've built." Everything he built. With my money? That night, something inside me changed. I cried until I had no tears left. Then I became very calm. And calm is more dangerous than anger. The next morning, I began my revenge. Not with shouting, not with threats, with paperwork. The next morning, I did not call Edward again. I did not cry. I opened my laptop. If he wanted to choose power over love, I would learn how power worked. I contacted a lawyer in Toronto who specialized in business partnerships. I explained everything calmly: the transfer records, the clinic registration, the promises. She asked one simple question. "Was the money documented?" "Yes," I said. "It was transferred through my bank, clearly labeled." That mattered. Within days, I hired a financial forensic analyst. He requested copies of the clinic's incorporation documents and licensing filings. Since my name had been listed in early communications as a financial contributor, access was not difficult to request. I did not tell Edward what I was doing. He sent messages filled with guilt and excuses. I responded with short, polite replies. Inside, I was no longer the woman who cried at the airport. I was focused. 3 weeks later, the analyst called. "Sophia," he said carefully, "your money was recorded as establishment capital, not as a gift." I froze. "Are you certain?" "Yes. Your name is listed in foundational financial declarations." That was when I realized something. I did not need revenge. I had leverage. My lawyer explained what it meant. Because my £200,000 was recorded as establishment capital, I was legally tied to the clinic's formation. My contribution was not described as a personal gift. It was part of the startup structure. Edward had never told me that. He had also never updated the registry to remove or redefine my position. That was a serious compliance issue. If he married Debbie without clarifying ownership, my lawyer said, it could create legal exposure. I did not smile, but I felt something steady grow inside me. Control. We filed a formal inquiry with the Provincial Regulatory Board. Not an accusation, just a request for clarification about financial disclosures and structural transparency. It was quiet, professional, precise. 2 weeks later, the clinic received its first notice. Edward called immediately. "Sophia, what is happening? Why are regulators asking about capital structure?" His voice carried fear. I answered calmly. "I am simply protecting my investment." Silence filled the line. For the first time since the pregnancy, I felt equal again. Not emotional, not broken. Equal. And the net had only just begun to tighten. Regulatory reviews moved slowly, but they moved. Insurance providers requested updated documentation. Financial partners asked questions. Expansion permits were paused pending clarification. Edward's confident tone disappeared from his messages. He asked to meet in person. I agreed. We met in a quiet cafe in Toronto. He looked tired. Lines had formed near his eyes. "You're destroying everything," he said softly. "I am protecting what belongs to me," I replied. He tried to explain again about Debbie's family, about pressure, about fear. But his words sounded smaller now. "You should have told the truth," I said. "I didn't want to hurt you. You hurt me anyway." He reached for my hand. I moved it away. For years, I believed love meant standing beside someone no matter what. Now I understood something different. Love without respect is weakness. 3 months after the first inquiry, the review became formal. The clinic's financial disclosures were examined publicly within the professional network. Edward's world did not collapse in one moment. It narrowed. Opportunities slowed. Confidence faded. And he knew I was the reason. Settlement discussions began 6 months after the first notice. By then, Edward understood the risk clearly. If the review continued, his licensing renewal could face complications. Investors would withdraw. Reputation would suffer. My lawyer presented clear terms. Full repayment of £200,000. Equity compensation for documented partnership value. Coverage of all legal fees. Edward resisted at first. His pride fought harder than his logic. But numbers do not argue. Documents do not lie. Eventually, negotiation replaced denial. We met again in a boardroom this time. No soft lights, no memories, just contracts. Edward looked at me across the table. "I never meant for this to happen," he said. "I know," I replied. "And you still did it." 2 months later, the agreement was signed. The total compensation reached nearly triple my original investment. When the funds entered my account, I did not celebrate. I felt closure, but I was not finished. Because I did not want to simply recover. I wanted to rise. And I had learned more about healthcare compliance than I ever expected. Knowledge, I realized, was more powerful than heartbreak. Instead of returning home, I stayed in Canada. I invested part of the settlement into a new venture, a healthcare regulatory consulting firm. My focus was simple: help medical startups build ethically from the beginning. Transparent funding, clear ownership, proper compliance, no hidden structures. I hired experienced advisors. I studied every regulation I could find. I met with licensing boards and learned the system inside and out. Pain had sharpened me. Within a year, my firm advised 5 clinics across 2 provinces. Within 2 years, we expanded into cross-border consulting between Canada and the UK. People respected precision. They respected honesty. They respected strength. Edward's clinic continued operating, but it remained limited. Expansion plans were scaled back. Investors became cautious. I did not interfere further. I did not need to. My growth spoke louder than any action. 2 years later, I received an invitation to speak at the International Medical Systems Summit in Toronto. Keynote speaker. As I read the email, I felt something settle inside me. This was not revenge anymore. This was transformation. And fate had one more meeting waiting for me. The conference hall was larger than I expected. Glass walls reflected the city skyline, and banners with my company's name stood near the stage. Seeing my name printed beneath the word founder felt unreal. 2 years earlier, I had cried in a hotel room. Now, I stood backstage reviewing slides about ethical expansion and transparent funding. When my name was announced, the applause felt steady and warm. I walked onto the stage calmly. I spoke about compliance, about integrity, about how strong foundations prevent collapse. I did not mention Edward. I did not need to. Halfway through my speech, I noticed him near the back of the room. He looked older. His posture was slightly bent. His confidence was thinner. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away first. I finished my presentation with a simple sentence. Ambition without integrity always costs more in the end. The audience applauded again. Afterward, investors approached me. Hospital executives asked for meetings. And then, quietly, Edward began walking toward me. I felt no anger, only clarity. He stopped a few steps away, as if unsure whether he had the right to come closer. Sophia, he said softly. His voice no longer carried certainty. It carried regret. You were impressive, he added. Thank you, I replied. For a moment, we stood in silence. The noise of the conference faded around us. I'm sorry, he said finally, for everything. I studied his face. I searched for excuses, for manipulation, for fear, but I saw something else. Loss. I know, I said. He swallowed. I thought I was protecting my future. And in doing that, I answered, you lost it. He nodded slowly. Debbie and I. It's complicated. I did not ask for details. That chapter of my life no longer belonged to me. You didn't lose me when you chose her, I said calmly. You lost me when you chose fear over integrity. His eyes filled with emotion, but I felt steady. I wished him well. Then I walked away. This time, I did not look back. In the months after the conference, my firm grew faster than I expected. New clients arrived through referrals. Investors trusted our methods. Regulators appreciated our transparency. We expanded into the United States, then into parts of Europe. Every contract I signed felt like proof that my life had not ended the day Edward betrayed me. It had begun. One evening, I received news from a former colleague at the clinic. Debbie had discovered the full settlement details. She learned about my recorded partnership and the compensation Edward paid. She had believed his story for years, that he built everything alone. The truth fractured their marriage. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. Truth always rises. I never contacted her. I never interfered. My actions had never been about destroying a family. They had been about reclaiming my own future. Years passed. The pain faded into memory, but the lesson remained clear. Love should never require you to disappear. 5 years after the settlement, my firm managed projects across 3 countries. We advised hospital networks on compliance and ethical investment. I often thought about the young woman I used to be, the one who transferred her inheritance without hesitation. I did not blame her anymore. She loved deeply. She believed in loyalty. Those were not weaknesses. But now, I loved differently. I asked questions. I demanded clarity. I trusted actions more than promises. During a board meeting one afternoon, an assistant handed me a letter. It was from Edward, handwritten. He explained that his clinic remained open, but small. Growth had slowed after the regulatory review years ago. He admitted he had underestimated the cost of cutting ethical corners. He thanked me, not for the settlement, but for forcing him to face truth. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. Some apologies arrived too late, but they still teach something. 10 years after I first met Edward in that glass lobby, I stood in a newly built hospital wing funded through my firm's advisory network. Patients walked through bright halls. Nurses moved calmly. Systems ran smoothly. Transparent, compliant, strong. Reporters interviewed me about sustainable healthcare expansion. They asked about my inspiration. I paused before answering. I learned that foundations matter, I said simply. Later that evening, I stood alone near the large windows overlooking the city. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember the spilled coffee, the airport goodbye, the phone call about Debbie, the hotel room tears, and the morning I chose paperwork over panic. I smiled softly. Edward built a clinic. I built a legacy. And the difference between us was simple. He chose fear when tested. I chose growth. That was never about revenge. It was about becoming someone stronger than betrayal. And that was the real victory. Success did not erase memory. It reshaped it. As my company expanded, I began mentoring young professionals, especially women entering healthcare investment. Many reminded me of who I used to be: bright, hopeful, trusting. During one workshop, a woman asked me, "How do you know when to trust someone in business?" The question stayed with me. I answered honestly, "You don't trust words, you trust transparency. If someone hides details, that is your answer." After the session, I sat alone in my office and thought about Edward again, not with pain, but with distance. He had not been evil. He had been afraid. Afraid to lose opportunity. Afraid to challenge Debbie's powerful family. Afraid to risk his clinic. Fear can make good people choose wrong, but fear does not excuse betrayal. That night, I reviewed new contracts with careful eyes. Every clause mattered. Every signature carried weight. Because I had learned something important. Love and business both require clarity. Without it, both can collapse quietly. And I would never allow my foundation to be unclear again. 3 years after the conference, my firm opened a permanent office in Toronto. The city that once held my heartbreak now carried my success. I moved into a modern apartment overlooking the lake. The view reminded me that life keeps moving, whether we are ready or not. One afternoon, I ran into an old nurse from Edward's clinic at a networking event. She hesitated before approaching me. "I always admired how you handled everything," she said softly. I thanked her. She explained that Edward eventually stepped down from managing daily operations. The stress from regulatory scrutiny and financial strain had worn him down. Debbie had left 2 years earlier. The clinic survived, but barely expanded. I listened quietly. There was no triumph in hearing that, only confirmation that shortcuts create cracks. When the nurse walked away, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. If Edward had not betrayed me, I might never have discovered my own strength. Sometimes the door that closes painfully is the one that forces you to build your own, and mine had become stronger than I ever imagined. On the 10th anniversary of the clinic's opening, I received an invitation to a healthcare leadership gala. My company was being recognized for excellence in regulatory ethics. As I prepared my speech, I thought carefully about what to share. I did not want to tell a story of revenge. I wanted to tell a story of responsibility. At the gala, the ballroom glowed under soft lights. Leaders from across the industry filled the room. When I stood at the podium, I spoke calmly. "Integrity is not a rule," I said. "It is a choice you make when no one is watching." The room grew quiet. I learned that lesson the hard way. I did not mention names. I did not need to. After the applause, several young doctors approached me. They said they wanted to build clinics the right way. That mattered more than any settlement. That was impact. And impact lasts longer than anger. Late one winter evening, I found myself driving past the street where Edward's clinic still stood. I had not planned to go there. My car simply turned that way. The building looked the same from the outside. The sign still carried his name. Lights glowed softly inside. For a moment, I considered walking in. Not to confront him, not to reopen wounds, just to see the place that had once held my dreams. But I stayed in the car. I realized something important. Closure does not require revisiting old rooms. It requires understanding that you no longer belong in them. I drove away without stopping. As the clinic disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt light, not because he lost, but because I had moved beyond needing him to. Years continued to pass, and my work became my legacy. We launched scholarship programs for medical entrepreneurs who lacked funding but showed integrity. We created mentorship networks across countries. I often told them, build carefully, grow honestly. One afternoon, I received news that Edward had sold part of his clinic to cover debts. He remained practicing, but the business no longer fully belonged to him. I closed the email without emotion. Our stories had separated long ago. That evening, I walked along the lake near my apartment. The wind was cool, and the city lights shimmered on the water. I thought about the girl who once cried in a hotel room, believing her life was over. If I could speak to her, I would say this: you are not losing everything. You are becoming something greater. Edward built a clinic. I built resilience. And resilience is a foundation no one can take. When people read about my success in magazines, they often assumed I'd always been confident. They saw the awards, the interviews, the growing company. They did not see the hotel room. They did not see the shaking hands. They did not see the moment my world split in two. One afternoon, during a podcast interview, the host asked, "What was the turning point in your career?" I paused before answering. "It was the day I stopped asking someone else to choose me," I said, "and chose myself instead." That was the truth. The day Edward admitted he would marry Debbie to protect his clinic, something inside me broke, but something stronger replaced it: clarity. I realized love should never demand silence. It should never demand shrinking. From that day forward, I promised myself one thing: I would never again build someone else's dream without building my own. And that promise shaped every decision I made after. As my firm entered its 12th year, we partnered with major hospital groups across North America and Europe. Our compliance models became case studies in medical schools. Sometimes, young doctors would ask me privately if I ever regretted giving Edward that money. I always answered honestly, no. They looked surprised. If I had not invested in his clinic, I might never have learned how systems truly worked. I might never have understood the power of documentation, transparency, and leverage. Pain had educated me. It had forced me to grow beyond comfort. One evening, while reviewing financial reports, I found the original bank transfer record saved in an old folder. £200,000. At the time, it had felt like everything. Now, it looked small compared to what I had built, but I did not delete it. It reminded me of who I once was and how far I had come. A few years later, I attended another international summit, this time in London. My company sponsored an entire panel on ethical expansion. As I stood backstage, I felt the same calm confidence I once admired in others. After my speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My fiancé wants me to invest in his startup," she said quietly. But something feels unclear. I did not tell her my entire story. I simply said, "If it is real, it will survive transparency. Ask for everything in writing. Protect yourself." She nodded, grateful. In that moment, I realized my story had moved beyond Edward. It had become guidance. It had become protection for others. And that, more than revenge, felt powerful. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat by my window with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up. The memory of that first spilled coffee at Morris Consulting drifted through my mind. If I could step back into that lobby, would I change anything? For a moment, I considered it. Then I shook my head. Every choice, Even the painful ones led me here. Edward taught me a hard lesson about fear and integrity. Debbie's presence exposed cracks I refused to see. The betrayal hurt deeply, but it forced me to build something unshakable. I had once believed love was my foundation. Now I understood something better. Self-respect was, and self-respect does not crumble when someone walks away. 10 years after I wired that money, I stood on the balcony of a hospital wing my firm helped design from the ground up. Patients moved through bright halls. Systems ran smoothly. Every document was clear, every partnership transparent. I thought about Edward one last time. He had wanted impact. So had I. The difference was simple. He protected his dream by sacrificing integrity. I protected my integrity and built a greater dream. I did not destroy his life. I did not scream or beg. I used knowledge, law, patience. I reclaimed what was mine. And then I built something bigger. People sometimes call my story revenge. But revenge fades. Growth lasts. I backed my fiancé's dream. He chose fear. So I became something he never expected. Not his enemy, not his shadow, but his lesson. And that was more powerful than anything he ever built.